Welcome to On Rails, the podcast where we dig into the technical decisions behind building and maintaining production Ruby on Rails apps. I'm your host, Robby Russell. In this episode, I'm joined by Jay Tennier, engineering manager at Rainforest QA. Jay's been there for a little over 7 years, working across a long-lived Rails monolith, a handful of supporting services, and a front end powered by React and Grape APIs. Over that time, he's seen the platform and the team grow, shrink, refactor, backtrack, simplify, and occasionally reinvent itself. Jay brings a practical perspective on what it takes to keep a mature Rails app moving, hiring in different stages of company growth, taming legacy endpoints, deciding when to pull back microservices back into the monolith, offloading analytics to things like BigQuery, and figuring out how a small team survives all of it. We'll dig into the technical decisions behind those choices and what other teams might take away from Rainforest's journey. Jay joins us from Ontario, Canada. All right, check for your belongings. All aboard. Jay Tennier, welcome to On Rails.
Thanks for having me.
All right, Jay, let's start with this really hard question. What keeps you on Rails?
It's a good question. I guess there's two sides to it, right? There's the personal one. Personally, I'm still on Rails because I love Rails. I've been developing with Rails for, since what, 0.13, I think? Yeah, somewhere way back there. My real first app was in like version 2, but there's just something about Rails that has always kind of suited my head once I kind of wrap my head around it. And the other thing too is I just love Ruby. Tried a few other things, been writing in Python lately, and it's cool, right? Nothing wrong with it, but yeah, there's just something about the way that Ruby is that I really, really like. And then from the Rainforest perspective, we are on Rails because we've always been on Rails. Well, I shouldn't say always, but for a very, very long time, we've been on Rails. And decision was made not by me, but by my previous boss about 8 years ago. And the decision was we're hiring people to work with Rails. We have a bunch of people who work with Rails. So unless there's a really good reason not to use Rails, we should use it, because just to keep everybody on the same page, nobody having to learn anything else. And that kind of went with Ruby too, where it was, if we had any kind of side stuff that we needed to do, we're going to keep using Ruby for that. And there's a couple things that we didn't use it for that made sense, like our CLI is written in Go, but it really panned out because we do have a service that's in Erlang, and all of those people have left, and now nobody knows what to do with it. And then we had kind of like a side project that somebody wanted to try out, Phoenix, and same thing. Those people left, and it's just, anybody know Phoenix? And no, nobody does, right? So sticking on Rails has just been kind of like the mantra for Rainforest for a long time.
Nice. And we'll dig into your Rainforest stack in a moment. I'm curious about, you mentioned been using Rails since, .13 or so. I think that's pretty much around, I think I might have barely beat you by like 0.12. And that was probably like, a month apart or something like that. So give or take. Out of curiosity, what tech stacks or tooling were you working with prior to that?
Back then, that was PHP and hand-rolled an app. I took over an app that was like an employee satisfaction survey app that was written by a student in PHP. And so it was just kind of taking that, extending it out. And then from that point, that was back in the Slashdot days, coming across all this new cool stuff. And Rails kind of showed up. And I wasn't able to really use it at that job because I was the only developer. I couldn't stop doing what I was doing in order to do that. But I had a little side project that I spun up with Rails 2, I want to say. It was like an internal time tracking app for myself. And then wrote some Ruby code, some glue code kind of thing back then. But yeah, it was PHP. And then that was when Cake was out, and Cake was kind of doing the same thing. And then I got it in my head that I could rewrite the survey app in an MVC style. So I started digging into the Rails code base and was trying to do similar things, setting up like controllers and how views would work and delaying content rendering, and learned a lot. Too much, probably, because then it was a typical, like, I got half of the code base moved over to that, and then the other half wasn't there. But luckily, I left that to somebody else.
I can appreciate that. And I think that resonates with some of my earlier projects pre-Rails as well. So for our listeners who may not be familiar with Rainforest QA, can you give us kind of a high-level overview of the product platform and where Rails fits into it today?
Yeah, so Rainforest QA is a SaaS platform. Lets pretty much anybody with a SaaS app test their app at the highest level possible, which is like in the browser. So most people I think are familiar with Playwright or Selenium, headless testing, that kind of thing. But we don't give you that. We give you a user interface to go in, create your clicks and your fills and your observes and that kind of stuff. And then we execute the tests that you have written using a VM, which we drive so that you've got basically a real mouse clicking around on real elements. We have some like DOM fallbacks and that kind of stuff for those people who need it, but we're kind of the belief that trying to find the actual images of things on the page is a little more resilient than just, hard-coded DOM IDs, and then interacting with them in that way. And the other thing too is because it's a VM, you're not trapped in the browser. You have access to the entire OS if you want. So we have a lot of companies who need to install an app and test the app in concert with their actual like SaaS app. So they can do that because you're just basically interacting with the VM, right? So it's
I see.
yeah, it's pretty nice. And then it's generally that way. We've got an automated service, and then we also have a tester-driven service, which is using humans to execute your tests. So you can write out a different set of steps that are a little more loose that a human would understand, and you can execute those things too. And then we've got a whole AI thing going on right now as well.
Interesting. So we're not trying to necessarily plug Rainforest or anything. It's like everybody should go use this platform, or whatever. But the typical user or customer, is it like a QA team that's like setting up things for like within a product team, or is it typically a bunch of engineers that are trying to do away with needing to have some human QA people that are going around clicking things on their staging environment before things go to production, or is this used for a lot of like smoke testing, or a little bit of all of the above?
It's kind of all of the above. Yeah, smoke testing is a big thing. We use it as our like last stopgap before we release. But we have some clients who don't have a QA team, and so they're getting the devs to drive it. That's I think where we prefer to be right now. But we also have QA teams that are using it as they set up their automated tests and then they drive it out. We dabbled in the like pure no code space for a while, so it was trying to get the like product owners to write those things rather than the devs, because our UX is pretty good for doing that kind of thing. So yeah, we're kind of at all of those levels kind of thing. But yeah, I think we're kind of going after developers right now.
I see. That makes sense. We had a previous conversation leading up to this, and you mentioned that Rainforest primarily has a monolith,
Yeah.
right? And so you're using React on the front end. Like what
Yeah.
other, and you'd already also mentioned Go and Erlang, there's a couple of other tools in your overall platform. Can you kind of walk us through what that whole ecosystem looks like today? Then we can dive a little bit back where it used to be and how it got to where it is today.
Yeah. So the main app, if you do use Rainforest, you're going to be looking at the monolith, which provides all the backend, the Rails monolith on that side, and then the UI is a separate React app. And then we have a couple separate services that I wouldn't call them microservices. They never really started as microservices, I don't think. The main one being what we call vManager, which is our VM manager, and that is another Rails app, and it's responsible purely for making sure that all the VMs that we have are available and setting them up, tearing them down. There's a lower level service written in Ruby that kind of sits closer to the OS called vControl that takes care of the actual nuts and bolts of setting all of that up. So if you open up a test and you need a VM, we talk to vManager, vManager talks to vControl, and then it comes kind of back up. And yeah, we've got an Erlang service, and that is mainly for the tester community. It's what we use to like set up jobs. Our testers come online, they have a browser extension, and they're like, I'm available for work. And so we have this Erlang service is just there to kind of mediate between testers and the jobs that we want to give them. And then we've got a CLI, and that was written in Go because we need to support it on every platform.
Sure. That makes sense. And when say your VM manager spins up a VM, where does that spin up? You're using, you have your own hardware, you do this at AWS, some other platforms, or?
We rent server space in LeaseWeb in the States and Hetzner in Germany.
Okay.
We started in Germany a long time ago, and that presents its own problems where you start up a VM and you go to Google and everything's in German. So we've
Oh.
had to do a bunch of stuff to kind of get around that, proxying through different places. Like,
Oh, interesting.
yeah, in most cases it doesn't matter, but if you want to actually, if you're just testing your own app, but if you're trying to like go out to the wider internet, it does it does make a difference. But yeah, so we've got a bunch of servers there. vControl runs on those servers. Make sure that those servers have, say, I don't know what the actual number is, but like we've got 200 servers and maybe we've got 20 VMs on each of those servers. And we try and make sure that like we've got enough Windows 10 over here and Windows Chrome versus Windows Firefox versus Mac OS, that kind of thing. So we've got those kind of all sitting there. And then mainly we spun up the ones in the US so that we could have them closer to most of our users. When we're executing your test suite, it doesn't matter where it is in terms of like latency, but when you're using the app and writing your tests and directly connected to that VM, we want it to be as snappy as possible. So we bought some servers over there to move them closer.
And how different is running, like, say, a suite of QA tests in this context different than running like a bunch of headless tests on your like local computer or in a CI server where you can, in theory, try to do a bunch of things in parallel? Is this still a lot of parallelization happening for?
Yeah, yeah. When you create a run for us is just like that's like the set of tests, right? That you want to execute, and so we just go out and say, get me whatever. We need as many of Windows Chrome VMs as you've got, and they're kind of running wherever. There are certain things that clients need to do, special things, right? Whether it's like using different proxies and that kind of stuff to kind of winnow down the VMs that are available to them. But in terms of your general, just like we're going to run something in Windows 11 Chrome, we've got a bunch of them. So you kick it off and we just go and get as many as we can.
Oh, I see.
We've got a little bit of concurrency baked in now because people were obviously eating all of the resources. You can kind of have everything if you want. And then we also found that a lot of clients don't want you hitting their site with 200 tests all at the same time. They want to lock that concurrency down as well.
When you do parallelize those types of things, does it then, like, let's say if there's a lot of tasks that are like that is trying to repeat that require you to log in, is it then having to go through, if you spin up 20 things in parallel, is it logging in 20 times in parallel and then running just one slightly different test on each of those logins? And so is that getting into any interesting tech? You just mentioned that maybe some of your customers don't want you to have, or don't want it to like oversaturate it with too much at the same time, but like, might there be some interesting technical decisions like, well, we're only allowed to have so many users with the same log into the app at the same time? How did that stuff get split up?
Yeah, that's always an issue with our clients. And it's when you're thinking about it as like a developer, it all just makes sense, right? Oh, well, we'll just seed QA with all of the correct stuff and it's fine. They could all log in at the same time and all of their data will be completely separate. And then you run into the real world of clients and they're like, we don't have a QA environment or we
Yeah.
don't have a way of reseeding data all the time. Some of them have structured things in a way where they can clean things out afterwards. Others are doing the seeding as part of the tests, which is crazy
Mm.
because it adds a bunch of time to test. Other clients are trying to restrict it down so that basically one user is logging in at a time and each of the tests kind of runs serially after that. So there's all kinds of different things that we've kind of had to help support. Rainforest used to have like the Rainforest way, of like, this is how you should do testing. Very prescriptive, and it's good, but sometimes you got to meet your client. Not sometimes, you really got to meet your clients
Sure.
where they are, right? It's like, oh, like you should have all of that stuff worked out and it should be a blocking step in your CI. Like if nothing passes or one test failed, you shouldn't release anything. And then same thing, you come across clients who are happily using the app with half of their tests failing on every single run,
Wow. Okay.
and they're happy that those tests are failing because they just expect those tests to fail, right? And maybe one day they'll get around to them,
Sure.
but they don't want to take them out because they like having them there.
Sure.
You know what I mean? Like there's something about their process that makes them feel good that even those failing tests are still failing.
Sometimes the failing test can be a little bit of a weird security blanket, or
Yeah.
who knows? Let's talk a little bit more about your stack there. So you mentioned, so Rails using, I think, React on the front end. Is that across all of the front end, or like in any back end type tools as well? And then where does React code sit? Is it in the same repository or is that a separate repository that how are you kind of organizing that over there at this point in time, at least?
Yeah, React is a fully separate repo. It used to be part of the main app, but it got split out before I joined, and that was almost 8 years ago. So it's been a long time that it's been its own thing. It's gone through multiple iterate in typical React fashion. There's all kinds of stuff going on in there. We have a front end team that is specifically deals with that. Everybody's allowed to kind of mix and match, right? But they're the experts, so we let them do the React stuff. Yeah, and then on the back end, so everything you see except for the login page is that React app, and then that React app makes just your typical HTTP requests to the monolith. There's been a lot of discussion in the past about exposing things like vManager to the front end or vControl to the front end, right? Or some of the other things. And we try to make sure that like everything ends up going through the back end, like the main monolith, for a number of reasons. Mainly because then you only have to auth in one place.
Sure.
That's nice and easy. But there's also that, like, when you know that there's one place to go, then the backend can capture that information and log it. There's one central place for all of that to happen.
Are you exposing, is it like everything then just through like a Rails API at that point then? Or do you have like any web interfaces that are built in Rails entirely, like in the back end? Like
The main admin for the monolith is bootstrapped too, if you can believe it. We still got some CoffeeScript in there too.
Okay, sure.
Haml templates, it's been around for a long time. The vManager's interface is all Rails based, and then we have a couple what are really microservices, which is like an email inbox and an SMS inbox, because part of testing, you're going to need to send emails. You want to make sure that you can get those emails and respond to those emails. Same with SMS. So those are their own little things. I mean, they are super light. I'm not even sure if they have admins. If there are, there's almost nothing there. It's just like an excuse to get to the good job admin page, right? Like that kind of thing.
So you're using Good Job primarily, or using any other background?
Oh, yeah, we migrated almost everything over to Good Job except for the main app. The main app is half Good Job and half Q Classic. I don't know if you know Q Classic, but it's a database background job processor that was written at Rainforest and released as part of open source. We're trying to get away from that because we're not maintaining it. Nobody's really maintaining it. So it's just kind of laying fallow for a while. People might ask, well, why would you do that? And the answer is, well, because it's so old that there was no database backed background job.
Yeah.
At that time. At least that's, as far as I understand it, that was the impetus for creating it. So yeah, right now we've got about half of our jobs in one and half of our jobs in the other. And like, it'd be nice to fully migrate it all over to Good Job. I mean, was Good Job a good choice? I mean, that was before Rails 8 with, I can't remember the...
Solid Q.
Yeah, Solid Q. I'm looking at that and it's just, well, should we just bail on both of these and move everything over to that? Like, I don't know.
That's an interesting thing to consider there, given that you already have them separately. I had not heard of Q Classic before. I'm looking up right now on GitHub. And does that integrate with Active Job?
I think it does on a couple of the branches. This is the problem, right? Is that because we're not really
supporting it as much.
Yeah, not supporting it. And Q Classic itself is owned by Q Classic, the Q Classic GitHub org. We have an extra thing called Q Classic Plus, which wraps all Q Classic stuff in a transaction and does a bunch of other things that we own. We just haven't reached out to anybody to try and do anything. So every time we needed to do something, we just created a new version and then point our gem file at it.
That makes sense. You said you've been there for about 8 years there or so now. In your opinion, what parts of the architecture have been the most stable over the years, and what parts have been, let's say, more turbulent?
Most stable has probably, it depends on what you mean by stable. We use Grape for the API. Again, this was back when we had a lot more, when we were a larger company earlier on, we had the notion that we would have a public API and a private API. And that was all with good intention. The CLI uses the public API to do the stuff that it does. We did have some clients who were writing against that API. And then we discovered that the performance got worse as we got more data. So we needed to slim down the responses. And we did that by using a slim param and then a slimmer param. And like we just kind of kept going down that route, all because we didn't want to break the public API and we didn't have a really good way of deprecating APIs. Like our API, I think, is at like an API slash v1 or slash one URL. So we can do it. It's just so much more work to kind of go down that route. We've never done it. So in that sense, like the public API has been pretty stable and
stable.
Yeah. But the private APIs, we've kind of moved away from, and I don't know if this is for good or for ill, but the more restful sense of picking the perfect resource name and putting your gets there and having filters and that kind of thing. Mainly because we do have a lot of data and we've had performance issues. We still do have performance issues. And so in some cases, the front end has the ability to gather all of the data already, right? There's multiple endpoints for it. Just go and get it. And maybe that's how we do a first pass, get that up. But it's normally super slow because we're making multiple requests and those requests can take a while. So what we've started doing is making like very specific endpoints for exactly what it is that the front end needs, and that's fully private, so we can change it as much as we want, and that seems to have worked out quite a bit better. Now it means an explosion of endpoints, and because they're private, we don't have docs for them, right? I'm sure we could configure Grape and Swagger in order to get us those things, but there's a lot of like, hey, front end, where are you guys getting this information from? And they tell us, and okay, you can grab that, no problem.
Out of curiosity for our audience, approximately how large is your overall engineering team at the moment, which across back end and say front end?
Right now we're 7.
Okay.
We've got 2 front end engineers, 3 back end engineers, but that includes me. So it's more like 2.5, 2.25, and then an ops engineer.
I think that kind of helps illustrate a little bit into some of the challenges of say a smaller, I'm air quoting, smaller team. I don't know how big the team was approximately at its largest. Do you recall? Or
so we've gone through multiple downsizings, and when I got hired, we were expanding, and I want to say we were engineering was probably between 40 and 50.
Okay.
Something like that. And then after the first downsizing, we went down to 15, 20-ish people. And then the last one, we went down to this 7. Okay. So it's been, there's a lot of code that a lot of people worked on. They're no longer around to explain just exactly what they were thinking.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. I think if we get time, I'm going to dig into that a little bit more. But I think at least the context of knowing that, like when you're working with your teams, like your front end's trying to gather some details, and you're like, well, you're hitting all of our RESTful APIs is kind of like the default way that Rails developers would kind of think about exposing that historically. And you're like, all right, you fetch some details and then you got to go fetch some other details based off the information you get. You're not maybe grabbing everything in one single request. I've talked to plenty of other companies, even on this podcast, much larger engineering teams are like, the conversations between the front end and back end, I mean, air quoting back end teams just doesn't happen as often. So they're like, all right, we'll just give you GraphQL so you can just, you can tell us what you want and we'll give it to you. And I think if we hadn't had that conversation, at least to talk about like how big of a team you have, you're like, well, does GraphQL make sense at a team size of say less than 10 people? Or is that, I'm assuming your team has maybe talked about it. Is that a safe assumption?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things that just perennially comes up. It was, and I believe before I got hired, so I mean, that was a long time ago, somebody gave it a try, but I never really got the particulars of why that failed. And I think it's part of it might have been like just the wrong incentives, right? It was literally like so that back end didn't have to talk to front end anymore, versus like how do we actually maintain this and get it working? And so it is funny though, because like we have all kinds of, well, I won't say failed, but not entirely successful experiments still living in the code bases. So why that was the one that like got put up and then immediately got ripped out, I'm not exactly sure. But yeah, at this size, right? It's one of those things like we're not big enough to be able to do it, but it seems like if we had it, maybe it would be better. But we're also small enough that we
Yeah.
can have the conversations that need to be had, right? Like we work very closely. Everybody works closely. We're on like one large team. Everybody knows what everybody's working on. Everybody can help out in some way. Our product manager is like directly involved. Our designer is directly involved. The way that you would think of like, I can't remember who it was, that like that squad based system of like, we'll put everybody
Yeah.
in like the like a little thing, and you'll have everybody gets a designer and everybody gets a product manager and that kind of thing, and they'll all like do their own features. Well, we've got that, but we only have one, right? And it's really high performing at that level because we all know what we're doing, right? Nobody really steps on each other's toes. And there's a lot of, hey, here's your endpoint, does it have everything? No.
Yeah.
Okay, well, what do you need? I need this and I need that. Perfect. And we just add it in, right? That it's the iteration that really gets us.
That makes a lot of sense. You mentioned there's been a lot of experiments. What are a couple of those experiments, if you don't mind me asking, that you would have, in retrospect, would have wished hadn't survived, or?
I'm not even sure that it's not so much that I wish they didn't survive. It's that I wish they had like seen themselves all the way
Mm,
through more than anything, right? I'd like to think we still have a really good culture, but back when we were a larger team, we had like a really good culture of supporting those kind of things. Like if you want to try something new, you read about something, you want to give it a shot, go ahead, give it a shot, but understand that like if this works, you're going to have to convince everybody else.
yeah.
And it's not like we're going to run Rubocop and replace all the single quotes with double quotes because we all decided that that's the way that we wanted to go. Like, we're not going to be able to do that. So we're going to have these things, and we're going to have to like put some processes in order to make sure that everybody's using that. I mean, one of the ones that I brought in, which was the dry-monads, which if people don't know, and they probably don't, I suggest checking out only because it's there's something about it that suits my brain, not the monad part, not the functional programming part, but the way that the code looks when you're done. That idea of having a set of like procedural steps in your typical kind of service object where you find the user, validate the user account, send the user an email, log the event somewhere, doing all of those things, but knowing that if at any one of those points any of those things fail, it just fails all the way up to the point where you called it. Passing success and failure around is just really nice, and being able to compose those service objects together, knowing that you're always going to be getting a success or a failure monad at the end of it. Like it just looks really nice. I really, really like it. And we've used it in a couple places, a couple important places to be fair, but it's just trying to get that as part of the policy and getting everybody on board with like, oh, we're creating a new endpoint. Don't just go and do the regular stuff, right? Like try and spend a little time and use this because we think it's good in some way, right? Like, yeah, it wasn't really something that I wish had died. It's quite the opposite.
Interesting. Yeah, I've seen dry monads, and that's all part of a dry RB, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Out of curiosity, is there a specific area of your application that you find that was really, really helpful in implementing that pattern?
Yeah, I was going through just to find like, because I know what I did, right? So I was trying to find some code that somebody who wasn't me actually used it on. And we have the concept of like deprovisioning a client. We always soft deleted everything. And then it got to the point where, well, there's two things. One is GDPR and that kind of thing, where it's like clients want their stuff deleted. So you have to delete it. It's got to go
Yeah.
out of the database. And then the other side was like, our database is like over a terabyte. I think we're close to 2 terabytes now. Why do we have all of this data in here? Like these clients have left. They're never coming back, or if they do come back, it's going to be completely useless. So how do we get rid of that? And so the deprovisioning process uses the dry monad pattern and just calls out each of those things, because we have to, when you delete all of the data for a client, we haven't denormalized client ID throughout the code base. So even though clients clearly own pretty much everything that's in the database, some of them you can get directly to like an edge node of whatever that data is. And in other cases, you need to take 2 or 3 steps. So all of that foreign key consistencies, that kind of thing, you have to start at the edges, delete all of that stuff, come up a level, delete all of that stuff, come up a level, delete all that. And if any of those things fail, we need to know about it. You need to know where it was. And I mean, yeah, you can wrap it in a transaction, but sometimes there are outside things happening, right? The S3 objects, that kind of thing.
Okay. That makes sense.
So there's a certain amount of like making sure that it all happens in a specific order, and if anything goes wrong that it comes back up and fails. And so it was really nice to like find that. I didn't realize that. I didn't have a lot to do with that code, so going in and seeing that, it's like, oh, that's a really good use for it. And then the other thing is, because you can decompose each of those things down, you can take the like, delete all of the client's jobs and just put it in a different place and call it. And then if you need a job that like, well, we're going to leave all the client data around for this type of client, but they want to delete all of their jobs or tests or whatever, then we can just call that and know that you're going to get that success or failure back.
I'll definitely include some links for our listeners in the show notes for you can go look up dry-monads if you're not familiar. Are there any particular educational resources you remember coming across that were really helpful outside of just linking over to dryrb.org?
Oh, that's a good question. I probably got turned on to it from the Rails email. What's the newsletter that like everybody subscribed to?
There's a few of them. The Speaking Rails or Ruby Weekly.
Yeah, Ruby Weekly. And I mean, I honestly just read anything that Evil Martians writes. Like, I'm not going to use all of their stuff, right? I'm not going to go all the way down, but they have such a different way of thinking about code, just code in general, how apps are built and that kind of thing, that like I always find something in there where, especially if you're dissatisfied with some of the like, this is how everybody does it, and you're looking at it and you go like, well, but why? Right? And Evil Martians probably looked at that and came up with another idea.
Yeah, I'll definitely include links over to their blog as well. Good articles on their end to our friends over at Evil Martians. Something I hadn't thought about talking about with you, but when you mentioned like the deprovisioning and just having all this extra data living around your database or in your S3 buckets and trying to come up with a cohesive way to maintain that, do you have, you mentioned the GDRP, or is that how you is it JD?
Yeah, I can't remember which one it is.
Backwards here. We're from North America, and so we're just subjected to having to kind of understand enough about it, but we're not living and breathing in it maybe as much as maybe our friends in Europe are. But trying to think about that, I know a lot of client projects that we work on where they just never get around to dealing with that stuff unless it's like forced on them because of something like a policy. But I'm like, your database backups, everything is just so much slower to do. Making updates with your migrations, updating some data, this takes so much longer because you have so much more data in your database. Why are you not deleting more of this stuff more often? And I think we've always been like, wow, it's just server space is
it's free,
relatively cheap, but
it's throw more money at it.
Right. But there's also a lot of scenarios where, like, as you mentioned, you have clients that are no longer there, customers that are no longer using this. And if they were to log in today and it's been 7 years since they last activated their account, I'm assuming that most of everything in their system is not going to be workable in the way, so it's like, it's an interesting like onboarding, deboarding, and then like a reboarding process, knowing that like you don't expect everything to sit around in some database forever. So, what's your workflow like?
Yeah, just to carry on with that, like we've had multiple discussions around that, and some of it to do with just the size and like, why are we doing this, right? But like, like what does it mean for a client to come back even after 3 months and look at a result of a test that failed 3 months ago, right? Like what does that actually mean? Like, especially if they're like working on their app, right? Like the problem that we have is that, well, it's not really a problem. It's funny, but this is my former boss and I used to talk about this all the time. Like, do we have a data retention policy? No, we don't. It's like, no, you do. If you don't have a data retention policy, then your data retention policy is to retain all data forever because you haven't set any other policy. So that's where we were. We had a data retention policy of forever. Now you can change that. You can change that, send it out to clients, let them know, but you have to decide to do it. And then once you decide to do it and communicate it and do all of that kind of thing, then you can start enforcing it. But you can't just decide that we're only going to hold stuff for 90 days, right? Or 30 days, or even a week, right? In some cases, we have clients who create so much, who are running so much and have so much information that even and are producing changes to their app so much that last week's set of test executions don't mean anything. It's nice to see historically that this thing was passing and then it failed, but eventually, there just becomes too much data there. So, but on the flip side, we do have clients who like they schedule a test, like a run every month. And so if they want their historical data, those people don't, or the other people don't. So like, how do you make those kind of decisions? So we basically got to the point where it's like the retention policy now is when you leave as a client, we can do anything to your data within like 90 days, I think is the actual number, right? So we did actually make that decision. And then we spent a really, really, really long time figuring out how to delete all of that data correctly. And like when we did start deprovisioning clients, like, background jobs that were running for 2 weeks, deleting all of the
Yeah.
all of the objects in, because we don't tag S3 objects with any kind of client information. So we had to get all the keys out of the
Oh my
database
gosh.
and go and find them and delete them individually, right? That kind of thing. So yeah, lots of decisions that were made in the past because we didn't think about deleting stuff, right? And we had everything soft deleted. So everything was just still in the database anyways. Works out in some cases, but yeah, in other cases you're just like, well, we got to get rid of this. Like how do we do it? And the answer is you take a long time and then delete it all.
Are you doing any sort of multi-tenant in your app?
No. We've another thing that we've talked about a bunch of times, and it's always come down to let's just pay more money.
Yeah.
Just get a bigger database instance. Yeah, but we really did kind of want that because that idea of like a database for your client, all right, and then like when the client goes away, you just delete the database and it all goes away. That's so nice.
Yeah, it does sound magical. And there's their S3 bucket. Bye. I understand it's not as easy as it sounds. So you mentioned that some of you had more microservices in the past, and you brought some of them back into the monolith. Can you talk about a few of those? And do you remember what the original motivation was behind that, and like what motivated you to say, okay, let's backtrack that?
Yeah, like the main one that comes to mind is what we call our integrations service. We have basically a place in the app where you can set up things like Slack messages, Jira messages, what else? We used to have, I think, if you can believe this, Facebook messages. I still don't know why. So that was a separate app. It got brought into the main app just before or as I was being hired, kind of thing. And the idea there was like we were touching a lot of things that needed information, right? Like the microservice needed most of its information from the main app. And it was just like, this is becoming too much of a pain because every time we want to release something, you got to release the changes for the main app. But it's still not useful until you release the changes on the integration side and that kind of thing. So we took integrations and based on what I can see, we just dropped it into the main app and called it done and exposed not well, I guess there are really no endpoints. It was okay, well, here's all your stuff, use it. And let's just say it was written with a different philosophy than like a lot of abstractions, a lot of trying to figure out what exactly is happening here, tracing things down through multiple classes. So on the one hand, it made it easier to just do anything with the integrations because you could just make the change and ship it. And then on the other hand, it kind of made it worse because none of that was walled off or none of it is walled off from the main app anymore. And it's one of those, like, it seems like such a simple thing, but it's like the scary place to go. It's where developers go to like not die, but like go to just waste time. And it's everybody who gets onboarded at some point is asked to do something with integrations. And it's just like, but just so you're aware, you're going to be in there for a while. It's going to take you a bit to kind of figure it out.
Do you think there was anything around that when your team was a lot larger, the idea was like, let's allow these folks to just kind of work and isolate things a little bit more because the assumption was the team was going to keep potentially growing. And that led to a lot of that. And then you weren't really projecting, okay, well, if we're making decisions like this, we're going to break apart this, move the integrations to their own, or just set up this whole thing in a new microservice, what have you. But they're not thinking like, what if we're less than 10 people at some point in 8 years from now?
Yeah, nobody thinks that way, right? No, which it is understandable. But I honestly think that, like, based on the timing of it and when that integration service was written, that it was peak microservices, and so we needed the email inbox thing. So that was its own thing. SMS is going to be over there. The V manager, we have argued back and forth about whether it would make sense to bring it in. Probably not, but like at some point, there was talk about it. So I think that like, oh, it's an integration thing where it's going to be talking to, I don't know, name whatever services that you're going to be sending this information to. So it should just be separate as well. And then the hilarious part is that once we brought it in, half of those services shut down. So now we have all of this abstraction that written for another service, assuming that it was going to be in like the typical Rails kind of MVC kind of thing. So it's got all of its own modelish things, and you're looking at it's like there's only two. Like, why is there all of this indirection in order to support like Jira and Slack? And it's like, well, it's because we thought we were going to support more, and then we just never did, right?
That's a difficult balance that teams find themselves in. I think it's normal.
Yeah.
You assume you're going to keep growing if or that your integrations are going to keep increasing, and like, but then the reality maybe goes a different way. And I think that's being adaptable. Do you think that because you're working with Rails, that's made those types of decisions less painful, or do you think it would have been just as complicated regardless of the tech stack?
Maybe not Rails, but certainly Ruby, right? Like just the gem ecosystem in Ruby makes it so easy to know that you're going to be able to, for the most part, I mean, maybe it's a little worse now, but like, especially back in the heyday, that like there was going to be a Ruby library for whatever it was that you needed, right? So having it there, having it immediately at hand within the main app just kind of makes sense, right? Rather than putting it off somewhere and walling it off. But like, it's similar to, I can't remember what I was talking about earlier, but the idea that like the code base has been around for long enough that stuff that most people would reach for right now didn't exist, but we've already got that thing baked in there, right? And like we've had to go through, when they changed the Slack API, we had to go and change.
Yeah.
We had two different Slacks. We had like sending Slack messages, but then we also had like a Slack app. Well, then they got rid of the Slack app completely. So we had to come up with a new way. And it's always like, we're always just kind of scrambling for things. And but at least in that case, it's in the context of stuff that we know rather than just kind of being off. Like in that Erlang service, it just kind of happens to, as far as I know, it never goes down, right? We never have any issues with it. So thank God it's just still doing its thing.
That's good when things can just be reliable like that. I'm curious about your team's, I don't know if it's changed over the years, but what's your current philosophy or ethos on when do you bring in a community, say library or like gem into your project? What sort of signals are you looking for? Like this might be a good tool to lean on versus like we'll just build our own client library for some third-party API or whatever the particular scenario is. Do you have a kind of way of how you think about that at this point that might have changed from how it was a decade ago?
Yeah, I mean, when I first started 8 years ago, I think there was enough like engineering teams because we had so many engineers that, we were giving people features, that kind of stuff. And so there wasn't really a top down, this is how we should think of these kind of things. And so everybody was kind of like left to their own devices. And it's that typical thing where it's like, well, there's a library for it. So use the client library, right? And then call that client library every place you need it. And that goes all the way through there, no writing of adapters, no anything like that. Because everybody thinks that, what, are you going to change your database, right? And then you do, not us, but like we just had a thing where all of our internal metrics that we kept track of, we were using Librado for. Librado got sold to SolarWinds about, I don't know, 6 or 7 years ago or something like that. And we were still grandfathered on the old Librado. And then they just sent us a thing. It says, yeah, Librado is going away in September. It's like, okay, cool. But like we use that for all of our event data. So across all of our apps. So we didn't have any adapters. We didn't have anything to go like, oh, well, we'll just send this to Datadog instead, right? Instead of pushing it here, we push it there. It's like you have to find every call to Librado across all of your apps. And like, it was a good exercise for us, like just removing some stuff, getting rid of a bunch of that stuff. That's the kind of thing that I think in terms of like, you don't think about what it's going to be like when your team is much smaller. But even in that sense, like maybe it's not your organization is smaller, but your task now with like you've been put on there was no teams before, but now you're put on the platform team or the integrations team or whatever. And when you're that small, there is a tendency to like you can, we all agree, right? All 5 of us agree. What about the other 50 people? Who cares, right? So trying to keep that communication open and going. And then, it's just a typical trust as well, right? At some point, you need to just kind of let the devs do what they, not what they want to do, but sometimes they do, you do kind of need to learn from your own past, I won't say mistakes, but just decisions.
This episode of On Rails is brought to you by Skip Forgery Protection, because who needs trust tokens when you've got trust issues? Are you building a quick demo or a half-baked prototype or something you promise no one will ever use this in production, then you, my friend, are ready to skip forgery protection. Why verify request authenticity when you can just believe in the goodness of the internet? With one line in your controller, you can bypass Rails' default safety net and invite strangers to post whatever they want straight into your app. What could possibly go wrong? Skip forgery protection, like taking the batteries out of your smoke detector because it was beeping a little too much at night. Fast, questionable, beautifully reckless. You mentioned like that example of maybe not initially integrating with an adapter layer between you and whatever third-party service. Is that something you would encourage developers to think about doing from the get-go now? How do you make that, say, third-party gem? An easy one that I always bring up when I have conversations with developers is like, all right, it's really great that Stripe made it so easy to integrate with their platform for applications. Yet we have a lot of clients that come to us and they're like, hey, we want to add PayPal because not everybody has a credit card and around the world, and we want people to pay us for our product, right? And so they're like, well, your database has a bunch of columns called Stripe ID, and your code base is just littered with Stripe code, like literally from their gems, that I'm like, which made it great, but we're kind of a little in a weird pickle here where like, let's not just like add another thing on and it's easily just going to be a quick thing. Like this is a kind of a complicated problem. And so maybe I don't know what the answer to that all the time is. And people say, well, Stripe has some PayPal integration. It's not the same that everybody's looking for, but I'm just curious of like, do you think about that a little bit more when you're going to reach for a gem and be like, okay, well, we're going to lean on this, but I'm going to also take a little bit of extra time to do something in between me and that gem.
Yeah, this is like my hobby horse right now, simply because of the Librado stuff. We're in a similar situation with not Stripe necessarily needing to support PayPal, but more like we need a different set of pricing. Like we need a different pricing model right now. And there's a lot of stuff that is just baked into the current code base, right? That will not support that model. But we had our client metrics, or keeping track of like when users click on things and where they are in the app. We were using Amplitude. We turned off of Amplitude and went to Mixpanel. All of that stuff was being sent through Segment. And it's like, well, Segment was supposed to manage all of that, but we didn't do a good job of that. So yeah, to your point, it's like, this is a thing that I think, regardless of how big or small you think your organization is going to be in the future, it really, really, especially for third-party services, like it really makes a just sense to, even if it's just a super light wrapper around whatever it is that that third-party call is going to do, right? Even if it's just sending event data, right? Because you never know what the next library is going to expect from you. And having to go and update every single call point, right? Every single place that you're sending events to, right, is crazy. Now with Ruby, you can fake it out by basically getting rid of the gem and then having, you can monkey patch your way to great success, I guess. Yeah, I wouldn't recommend it. So even just having like light wrappers, and then also, please, please, when you write the wrapper, name it for the generic thing that it's doing. Like right now, I swear I just saw we have an adapter around Stripe calls that is namespace Stripe. It's like, well, okay, so if we like, that's not great. Like that should be like payment processor or something along those lines, right? Just to make it very clear that like this is the thing that it's doing. And eventually we're going to get around to sending stuff to Stripe, but the rest of it is like you really need to think through those decisions and be very precise about what, I mean, it's the naming problem. But at the same time, if you get it right or get it close, it saves you a lot of trouble down the line, because I would hope that your organization is so successful that it becomes so big that you need to support multiple payment processors, or that you just outlive, right, all of those services, right? That's a good problem to have, but from my experience, you do not want to be under the gun having to change things out, because especially when a service is shutting down, they might be good to you or they might not. You may just find out one day that they're done and now all of your code is just useless, right?
For our listeners, I think this is an interesting thing for people to think about. Anything that you're giving money to keep your platform moving and integrating with other services. It's something that I thought about as you were talking here. I was like, why are we not? Maybe something that people do is like, is there anyone out there that's like adding rules, like linting rules to like, if any of these vendor names show up in anywhere outside of like a gem that's being called in like one wrapper, like flag that, like
Mhm.
someone's touching something in the wrong place in the application. Like that could be an interesting, I'd be curious if anyone out there listening is doing anything like that, just to help remind those other 50 developers on your team, like, hey, be cautious. Like this is the pattern we're trying to follow. Let's be very mindful not to have, if sending something specifically to Datadog from a controller, we should probably be passing that through some wrapper or something and then sending it to Datadog. But at the same time, the incentives for all of those platforms is to have you be very, very coupled into their system. So their code examples that you're
Yeah.
going to find on their API docs, their developer guides, it's not going to necessarily be advantageous to you being able to switch away from them one day.
Especially when you're wrapping things in
Yeah,
blocks in order to, capture data from a span for Datadog. And like, yeah, it's hard to be that generic, right? But in some cases, it's like at the very least, I got through this Librado thing, and on the other side of it, we just have a metrics namespace that calls like what I don't know, like send
sure.
event or those kind of things. So that at least we have that, right? So if we do need to swap out Datadog with something else, which is who knows, right? Like, and the other thing too is just reminding people that like this isn't necessarily just about whether you think the company is going to last, right? This third party vendor or whatever. This is business, right? And business things go sideways a lot of the time. They decide to raise their price. You can't afford it. You have to churn, right? You want to churn. You don't like, you just don't like what they're doing. There's all kinds of reasons that you might need to come off of that. And so if you do it up front, then it just makes that decision so much easier as well, right? It's like, oh, well, yeah, no, because the last thing you want is to tell a manager that it's going to take, a month of engineering time to make this change over to, a vendor. Then they just do the math in their head and go, well, that's how much you make in a month, how many developers, and then how much was I paying? I guess we'll just keep it.
Yeah.
Right. Like, I mean, that's math, that's business, but it's not satisfying.
No, it's not. And, I was having a conversation recently with Kent Beck, and he's talking about optionality, and something came from one of his new books that he came out with, I think maybe last year for whatever reason. Then the name is, Tidy First is the name of that book. But he was talking about optionality being a thing that developers should be thinking about. Like, how are we building things and how are we keeping our options open in the future, but not necessarily at the cost of still making progress. I think there's that balance. Like you could like make things like over generic, like or premature optimization, for like this will allow us to do anything in the future, but also knowing that like you can fast forward down and like, yeah, platforms evolve and change or raise prices or get bought by VC, and then you don't like who, or private equity, and
Mhm.
then the company changes and you find yourself working, SolarWinds owning something that you're still integrating with years later, and they haven't made any feature updates to the platform, the application that you're still paying for. It's not going to get any better for you. And so you're like, well, what do we do? But the cost to change to
Yeah.
something else is way more than the couple $100 a month you're going to save. So you're not going to do it. But the developer experience and the maintainable experience for your Rails application might not be as pleasant as a result of that. And so how do you make those switches cheaper in the future? Not necessarily. They're not going to cost nothing.
Yeah. Minimize them as much as possible and realize that like even if you have a dedicated platform team, they probably have something better to do. But when you're especially as small as we are, like I took that on simply because the other developers have real stuff to do, right? Quote unquote, like real product thing. We're trying to make our product better, and trying to figure out how to switch from one metrics platform to another
No.
doesn't make anything better. The adapter thing is that's just one of those where like it feels like abstraction, it feels like early optimization or whatever. It's just like no, trust me, this is the one place where where you definitely want to do this. You won't regret it, and it's just easier. It's like it's nice to grep for it too, right? Like you can just find every place and like, oh, okay, throwing that like grep for Stripe in your code and hope that like one line comes back where it's instantiating the API client.
And is even using that one example, Stripe, it's like a lot of those gems will then install or create database columns. And then there's a little bit more complexity than just maybe wrapping the gem itself. But I
Yeah.
do think that it's worth exploring that a little bit more. In my fantasy world would be a lot of these vendors would actually encourage you to do that. And that would be actually a value add,
Yes.
I think, for developers to be like, hey, look, we're making it so it seems a lot more relatively simple to switch away from us, but you don't need to because we're the one that's giving you all the great stuff
Yep.
anyways. Not that I think that's like they have any alter that I don't think it is the reason why they do it that way. I think they're just trying to make it as simple as possible to integrate with their platform. But out of curiosity, do you think Rainforest does enough to if you're going to integrate with Rainforest, is that it's probably like all your documentation's like, this is how you do things with Rainforest, right? So it's not like, here's how you could take the same and go to one of our competitors and do the same thing over here. It's just kind of how that works. So it's kind of on the developers to figure that stuff out.
Yeah. I would argue that you can't do what you do with Rainforest with anybody else.
Tell me more.
I'm sure business will be happy to hear me say that.
Give me 2 examples, Jay. Come on, I'll put you on the spot.
Oh, okay. So right now, our big push is being able to generate tests from scratch using an AI, or using a prompt, right? And there's a lot of companies out there that can do that. But what we provide you at the end result is a Rainforest test that is then executed by Rainforest the same way that if you had gone in, hand created the test. We don't use AI to do the execution. It's not always using the prompt in order to drive your test out. Maybe some people don't like that, but that means that like if we generate the test and it's not up to your speed, not up to what you actually need to test, all of that kind of thing, you can go in and fix it and then execute it and then it's done. I mean, that to me, that's like,
Nice.
That's our big selling point. And then the other one is because we can argue about whether you should be, trying to find things via the DOM or via the actual image that you see on the screen. But we have found that like, that's how people think about stuff, especially just that like above the developer spot and not having to know what the actual DOM IDs are and all of that kind of thing. It just makes it easier. Just like, well, what do you want to click on? I want to click on the login button. We'll draw a box around the login button. We take a screenshot and then we find that login button. But the thing is, we're going to find that login button no matter where it is on the screen. So you can move your UX around, within reason, that kind of thing. It's still computers and there's still some things that we can't do, but that's the other big one is having tests that still execute, but have a little bit more leeway when you're actually trying to like go through the app. You can move things around and not have to necessarily worry that like, well, it's not at that, or like the same with coordinates. Anything could be at those coordinates. It's the web, right?
Sure. That makes sense. Safe to assume, I think you already kind of alluded to this, that you test your own dog food and
Yep.
as part of your own testing workflow. Outside of using Rainforest QA to test maybe the front end part of it, what's your testing framework and stack look like there? What's your strategy?
For the main Rails app, and for basically all of our Rails stuff, it's RSpec at the lowest level. Our admin, which I said was has Haml templates and all of that kind of stuff. We actually still have like view tests, like testing the actual views, the generated views, and it is just a nightmare to make any changes in the admin. So we're moving those over to system tests so that we can do at least basic are the things in the admin where they're like on the page where they're supposed to be. And then that's pretty much it, right? And then we put Rainforest right at the very top of the testing pyramid. So we have, I can't remember, maybe 10,000 tests, something like 10,000 specs. And then we've got, I think, around 220 Rainforest tests that all go out. The nice thing is we run those same tests against the front end suite when it goes out. So we're always checking whatever goes out, whether we've broken anything at any level. It's certainly saved us a number of times.
In preparing for this conversation, you had mentioned that you prefer, air quoting, wet tests. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, if people aren't familiar, the concept of like drying up your test to the point where you're using the subject and lets and the like nameless or example-less it blocks. So by the time you get down to the actual thing that got executed, it's like I don't even know. You can't read it, right? Like, and it's always bugged me just from a I don't know what's happening standpoint, but if you've ever had to deal with those, I had a contract with a company where that was standard and they would not accept a PR that wasn't written in that way. So what you ended up with was, I don't know, like a 2,000 or 3,000 line file. You're down at like line 2,500. Your 6 contexts in, the subject is changed 3 times. The lets, right? The like in our case, it would be like, just a client object or whatever, but that client has been modified or changed or overwritten or whatever it is so many times. And then there's also like a lot of people don't realize that like subject is memoized. So if it's been called and then you call it again, you're not re-executing it. There's just so many things that go wrong. And then at the very end of the day, you can't tell what is happening in that test. And so when it breaks, it's just impossible to fix. And so I've always been kind of a fan of like whatever collaborators, whatever anything needs. This is kind of test driven in a way, right? You're forced to enumerate all of the things that you need in the test. What's supposed to happen is you go, this sucks. There's just so many things here. And then you figure out a way to fix it, not by necessarily fixing the test, but
Oh,
by
interesting.
fixing the
Yeah, right.
code that it's calling, right? And then there's the other thing too, where it's like in certain cases, you're going to have to create objects a specific way inside of this test file. You don't need to use lets or anything like that. Just write yourself a nice little, it's still Ruby inside of there. So write yourself a method with a well-named name that says like what this thing is creating. Because the other thing I find is like they use generic names, right, all the way down. So it's the very top has a client, and then everything that changes as you get further down into the context, it just says client again. So you don't know what that client is. How is it changed? What is it? As opposed to if I was just writing it inside of a regular example and I've got like unsubscribed client, it would be the name of my variable, right? But you can't use unsubscribed client in that test because client is relied on by whatever two other things that are being created, especially clients, right? Because they're like the god, everything belongs to the client. So what ends up happening, and this is I'm really on the soapbox now, but what ends up happening is you become the linter compiler. You have to hold the entire stack
Right.
of whatever's happening inside of that test inside your head. And God forbid another example didn't fail, 100 lines up, right? So, and everything that you're looking to see is so far away from where you're actually working. I'm looking at a test down here, but the client is declared at the top of the test, and the thing that the client or that belongs to the client is halfway between those two because the context is switching around. Part of it is like it's not readable, but it's also not understandable. It just slows everything down.
Cognitively in particular.
Yeah.
There's a, I think, if I recall, I think Thoughtbot has a good blog post on this, if I recall. I'll include a link to that in the show notes for folk on wet tests. And I had one of their developers on my other podcast, I think earlier this year, and we talked about this a little bit more in depth as well. I'm curious, what are your thoughts on, do you lean heavily on things like FactoryBot or anything?
Yes. I mean, yes, for good and for ill, I guess, to some degree, right? I try not to reach for factories. Like we have them, they're available, they're there. We are using them all over the place. It's one of the reasons why I think everything's so slow. Um, Mainly because FactoryBot hides all of your associations. And then when you do get the worst thing is trying to you create something down at the bottom of the tree. The job group needs a run. The run has run tests. The run needs a client. And so you end up creating 15 things, but all you needed was the thing in this one specific state, normally state, right? Like I needed whatever I needed to have passed from one state to the other. And but you get all of this stuff up at that higher level, which in a lot of cases, I mean, it's not that it makes sense, but when you look at the code, it makes sense because those things are doing database stuff, right? They're making changes in the background, and we're reloading objects or models and checking to see what happened. But I prefer not to write that way if at all possible. But Rails makes it hard, but it's more that FactoryBot makes it easy to just get the thing that you need in the state that you need. But you really do kind of forget that there's a lot of stuff coming along with it. And we also a long time ago used FactoryBot to generate our seeds. So yeah, you can see where that goes, where it's like, oh, we just need, we need to seed the database with this test. And it's like, and we passed a client in, but so the client and the test are set up, but we didn't pass in all of the other associations. So all of those got set up, but they rely on the client. And in some cases, we weren't doing a good job of making sure that client was getting passed down. So you're creating things that belong to a test, but that belong to another client. It was a mess. We've since cleaned up a lot of that. But that was, again, a huge, huge project that we had somebody take on when we were bigger.
I'm curious about, given your domain, hearing you talk about your clients, customers, they're running their tests. Does that level of just the vocabulary, is that an interesting challenge unique to do you feel like there's a unique thing about working in this space of managing a platform for running tests and also writing tests in there? And like, is there an interesting, like when you're having conversations, like, are we talking about our clients' tests? Are we talking about our own tests? And is like, is there weird overlaps there that you're like, oh, this is kind of, I'll just leave that as an open question, I think.
I mean, the one thing that I think anybody who has ever worked for Rainforest would agree on is that we internally are horrible at naming things, whether it's projects or things. And some of it is for good reasons, some of it is for really bad. Your typical, just like, oh, that was a funny name, and then it's stuck, and now nobody knows why it's called that, and it's embarrassing to even just say it out loud, kind of thing. But we have a hard time because I think when it was initially spun up, the original app, they wanted to use test for the model, right? We have tests, you're creating tests, you're writing tests. It's stepped on like the test unit framework or something like that. And I'm sure that there was a way around it, but there was some kind of conflict. So they just went, oh, we'll just call it RF test. So now we have a model named RF test that we all refer to as tests, but we have a lot of associations. And in some cases, the model refers to the RF test ID, or we called it test ID, and we did the Rails dance to make sure like all of that kind of stuff. So like even within the app, we don't know what it like, you know what a test is, but it's yeah, having to have that conversation outside of it, right? Making clear that like most of the times we'll talk about rainforest tests, which are the tests that get written in rainforest, but then we get into, you know, interesting side stuff that might be too much, but like when you create a run, we snapshot your whatever tests are going to run. We take a copy of that so that while we're in the process of running, if you make changes to the test, we are going to test the thing that you ran, not the changes in the middle of making. So we call those run tests. Those run tests have steps, right? Each of the things you're going to do is a step. You can embed tests in tests. We have a join table called test elements that so it's just there's all of this kind and then down at like the actual execution level, we refer to the thing that gets there's like the overall run, but your test that gets executed is a job. And there is like the base class, but we have job tests, right? And then we have like automation job tests, right? So the original job test is for the tester community kind of thing. We've just overloaded so much information. It's like, yeah, you know, the joke about naming being one of the hardest things. It's like, yeah, it really is. And when you get it wrong, it makes it a lot harder to just talk through stuff.
I bet. Yeah. I think if you're always looking, like if you have to have some sort of glossary to explain, like, okay, but what thing are we talking about? Are we talking about our own thing? Are we talking about this thing?
Mhm.
There's a number of projects we're working on over the years, and like it'll just be like their business is like they have applicants or applications, and you're like it's an application form you fill out, and they're like, and then they try to name it like that, and you're like, okay, well we got all this application controller, and you got some weird controller with the word application in it, and people get confused when you're doing a quick search in your code editor or something like that, and it's the fun part of our job, right?
Yeah, exactly. We have like a folder, which is like a thing that you can put tests in. And at one point, we decided that that was actually called a feature.
Hmm.
So the idea is like it tests your app's
Mhm.
feature. So from the user perspective, you're not creating folders of tests, you're naming your feature, and then you're going to put the tests that test that feature in there. But on the back end, we don't have anything called feature. We have feature flags, but we don't have features. So if you don't know what it is, like you're just like, what is going on over there? But yeah, you need to know that like the endpoint is named folder. I think. You know what? It may be called feature, but we return a folder object. Like it's, you know, like you just get into that thing of like being careful. Like, what are you naming this? Having a like a tight knit group that is deciding on the new things that you're building and coming up with that stuff ahead of time, because we don't want products talking about something that is getting translated to the front end, that is getting translated again to the back end, because we came up with the name, but you know, front end named it something different in the React app, and then product goes, oh, that name's not flying. So they call it something else. Like, well, we got database, like we've already written all of this stuff, right? Like we're writing the databases stuff. We're not making those changes. So you just kind of suck it up and put a comment up at the top of the thing, and hopefully that's enough.
The joys of the decisions that we've made in the past and the decisions we'll continue making, and we have to live with them.
Yeah.
You mentioned earlier that you have a pretty large database, and is it safe to assume you've had some performance challenges like reporting or anything like that? And like, how do you think about gathering data about that volume, about your customers? Like if you need to build out any analytics type tooling for your admins or for your customers, how do you approach that there?
Building that stuff out, it's funny because we moved off of Heroku onto Google Cloud, I don't know, about maybe 6 or 7 years ago, 7 years ago. And with that comes a whole bunch of stuff that Google provides that you just don't think about until you think about it. And back then, we were large enough that we had what we called the science team. And the science team was doing things like coming up with our machine learning model for doing the image matching that we do. And then just doing interesting things with our internal client data, how much they run, what they're running, all of that kind of stuff. And so they put all that into BigQuery. BigQuery is like the place where all of our analytics kind of like start. Yeah, anything that's happening in the app, we don't write immediately. We do like a daily or twice daily sync to BigQuery. Everything gets shoved in there. And then we've got a couple ways of getting that information out. We used to use it mainly for like internal stuff, right? Board meeting, they want to know X amount, how many tests have been executed for the last 60, 90 or 30, 60, 90 days, those kind of thing, trending charts, all of that kind of stuff. So we would write the queries against BigQuery. BigQuery is cool. It's one of those things you got to wrap your head around because it doesn't work the way that you think it does. We have since, I can't remember when we did this, but we launched Redash, which we're hosting ourselves. And Redash is essentially like a front end, like a SQL front end, right? Write a bunch of queries and you can save those queries and you can visualize those queries, like nice, simple kind of thing. We use that to answer those same questions now. We don't have to do quite as much stuff in BigQuery, like in BigQuery, I mean, like we were using DBT in order to capture some of the SQL and stuff that we were doing. But for Redash, it's just really nice. You can point it at BigQuery. We've also got to point it at a read-only version of our database. So if you don't have whatever post-a-co or like actual CLI access to the database, you can hit the read-only database and like ask it whatever queries you can think of. And so our customer service managers are using that. Whenever we have board stuff, somebody can write a query, save it in there, and hand it off to whoever needs that information. You can set it up to refresh, or it'll just like cache that information. And whenever you want a new version of it, you just go and reload the page and get it all again. So it's pretty cool.
Have you intentionally like removed a feature that was built just like say within Rails and just kind of entirely moved it over into relying on BigQuery?
Oh, no, we didn't remove it. We just recently launched a new, basically internal client metrics, right? Clients wanted to know all of their stuff, how many tests have failed and how many executed creations, all that kind of stuff. The typical thing that you would see on on a decent dashboard. And we were looking at doing that, but we came across a project called Cube.js. And Cube.js, it's basically like, how do you get your front end to talk to BigQuery? Because BigQuery has all your data, right? And so you can't just be making requests, right? Even if you like got that worked out, you don't want to have all client data exposed kind of at that API level, right? We need to have, given the current client who is logged in, what do they have access to? And so Cube.js gives you basically a way of proxying that auth, which is really nice. Cube.js has its own thing. It sends a client ID. We send it to the Cube.js instance, and then you declare basically just a set of essentially views into the BigQuery database that will let you do filtering and grouping and that kind of thing. But it's all based on what is actually sitting in BigQuery. So the meat of it is we have BigQuery views for that, and then Cube.js just kind of sits in front of that and lets you access only what you need from it at the client level, and then lets them change dates and periods of time and grouping and that kind of thing, which is pretty nice.
And that's primarily as like a read-only
Yep.
type of thing. So I'm just thinking like earlier we talked a little bit about GraphQL, and for anyone like looking at different options, is this kind of like an alternative path if you're just using this for a read-only, like be able to display information to your users instead of maybe going down the path of maybe integrating GraphQL if you're only primarily doing that for displaying I'm guessing maybe those with the GraphQL are probably need to do a lot more writes as well, but is there some overlap into the functionality that these patterns are offering?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know GraphQL that well, but I do know I do know trying to get a Postgres database to just compile a bunch of stuff when you have like millions of records in a table that need to be joined with another million records, right? You can kind of think of like the Cube.js, the BigQuery thing is like that's where your cache is, right? we don't provide you, and it's very clear in the front end that you're not getting real-time data. You're not going to kick off a run, see it complete, and see
Yeah.
those tests show up in that. You're getting it once or twice a day, and then that's it. But that allows us to offload all of that to those services which are good at it, right? Versus the, well, I want a count of all my tests. All right, we'll go get a count of all the tests. Well, I want a count of all the failed. And as soon as you start compiling all of this data, especially at, when I say scale here, at the scale that we're at, I don't mean like the amount of clients that we have, but we just do have a lot of data. And so when you start slicing and dicing that, the performance is just horrible. So we've done some internal caching and that kind of stuff, right? You get to the end of even just like trying to count, it's never the like what, how many tests were executed for this run. It's like you're on a page and you're seeing all of the past runs, and it's in a table and there's a count of all of the tests that were executed in those runs. Well, now you need the count for every single one of those runs, right? And they page over and they go get, and then they page back. And so there's like a little bit of caching there, but you don't want to be counting all of that and then just keep
No.
now keep splitting that, right? It's not just tests, it's passes and failures, it's this and that. So you're constantly trying to figure out what to do there. And like we've solved that in a couple of ways that are, they definitely got solved, right? But it's not ideal. And so we just saw that as like, well, we're going to put all of these graphs on the very first page that you log into. And we're just going to, every time somebody logs in, we're just going to make all of those queries. We already know it's like not tenable, let alone trying to group them by date and that kind of thing. So it's like, what can we do? Well, we have BigQuery, and right, that's where all the data lives. So this seemed like the, if you can believe it, having two separate services provide this data is way easier than trying to get the performance out of the Postgres database that we normally would.
I talk about that with a couple of other guests, I think, where there's that challenge of like you sometimes displaying metrics and data that, but let's say like a dashboard page where someone logs into your interface because like for whatever reason, the product team thought that would be the interesting information people want to see first. But
Yep.
sometimes it's a really expensive hit just to load that information. And they might be trying to go down and do a different task that just happens to be the first page that you're landing them on. And so you're hitting your database a bunch depending on the size of that client and how much data they have. And there could be a pretty big hit. And then teams are then trying to optimize that page because it's so frequently hit. Subtext here also maybe not actually what people are actually wanting to look at. It just ends up being the thing you display at them. So what can you do to speed that up? And so people go down the path of trying to cache things and trying to optimize behind the scenes. And like, this could be another alternative. Like, what if we just speed up? Maybe another question is like, maybe don't land them on a dashboard of a bunch of graphs that they weren't looking for yet until they click there. But that's a product decision. And I'm just going to get off my soapbox there for a second. But
yeah, exactly.
Jay, I want to pivot the conversation a little bit and talk about, in particular, deleting code and retiring services. Like when you reach a point where it's time to sunset something. Because I know that you mentioned that there's some tools that may be written in other languages that nobody in your company knows that well anymore, and some of them might still be around. But like for you, what triggers that conversation about when it might be appropriate to sunset a service?
That's an interesting question because I'm trying to think back, and it's like there's been multiple kind of ways into that. Some of them have been as simple as we get a bill and you look at it and you go, well, that's a lot of money that we're paying to a third-party service. Do we still need this third-party service? And maybe if we're larger, we got more people that can, it's not so much the service or the money, but the fact that we know that like that lives in the code somewhere. Right. And so if we can get that out of the code, that just makes the code base smaller and makes things easier to handle. The other side of it is like, yeah, we had a service that was written in Phoenix Live View that was helping us do some, I'm trying to think of the word for when you're doing the machine learning and you're trying to train up the models and doing like which image is the one that should have been chosen, that kind of thing. We had this whole thing that was supposed to, we were capturing all that data, feeding it all back in, and you want to talk about bad naming, we called it Oracle, and it was being fed into, you guessed it, a BigQuery database, not an Oracle database. But it was supposed to be like, the Oracle at Delphi kind of thing. It was going to show us the future of that kind of thing. And so when we downsized, the folks that were not only responsible for working on it, but also responsible for kind of that whole segment of the business is just like, well, we don't have the expertise for it. What should we do about it? Basically costing us nothing, right? As long as nobody uses it, it's fine. It'll cost us a little bit to kind of like keep it running. So it's not the cost at that point, but it's the overhead of knowing that it's there, that anytime we need to do any kind of like some kind of backplane updates or GCP this or those kind of things, it's always kind of hanging around there. And so the question is like, is this useful? And if it's not useful at our size, it makes it really easy to just go, well, let's just turn it off, right? Like, does anybody want to take responsibility for this? And if the answer is no, I certainly don't, right? And so, deleting that service, getting rid of it, stopping all of the data that we were flowing to it, that kind of thing. That was a real easy decision. There's some other decisions that have been a little harder, but what it comes down to is, especially for us, we're so tight knit, and because we have product like right in with us, we still have engineering meetings to talk about engineering stuff, but the real meat of stuff is always product design and all of us. And so like we've had a couple of things where like we spent a lot of time developing a feature, and you're looking at it, it's just like, does anybody use this? And somebody goes, I forgot that that was there. Okay, well, if you forgot that that was there, we haven't touched it in a while, then we can ask James, our product manager, and just say, James, like, are clients using this? We have really good relationships with our clients, talking to clients a lot, maybe not all of them, but like we've got a good subset of clients who will tell us when things are good and bad and that kind of thing. And we've got, metrics that'll tell us how much it's being used. And so there is a certain amount of like, maybe it stays there, but the second that product wants to do something and is going to touch that thing, and we go, we could delete it and save ourselves a couple weeks versus, well, I mean, we start touching it, we've got no idea what's going to happen here. Those decisions are much more easily made nowadays because we really just want to be tightly focused on the stuff that we're working on.
Do you feel like your team celebrates subtraction enough?
Yeah, I mean, maybe too much. One of our front end developers, there's a feature that he's been trying to get us to remove for a very long time. And it's basically like the editor that you use to write plain English tests for our tester community to execute. It's really old, really clunky, and it gets in the way a lot of times because we think in terms of like the automated side of things. That's where all of our focus is on. And then somebody will say, okay, but if we do this, how are we going to handle that in the plain English editor? And he's just like, we could handle it by getting rid of it. Right. So there is like, I don't have to worry about everybody always thinking about like just additive. It's just great to see that come up in Slack where somebody says, hey, I just came across this thing. Can we delete it? And if the answer is yes, I mean, we celebrate that. We don't maybe celebrate it outside of engineering as much, but we certainly celebrate it within the group.
No, it's something I've been thinking a lot more about recently is like how teams that, as you've touched on, like your team's gotten smaller over the years. And there's this kind of thing where like, I think when people get hired at a point in a company where the company is growing, so there's kind of an assumption like, well, we're making decisions based off of a future world where there's more developers. But whether or not it's, I'm going to say air quote, ideal or not, there's a good chance that future version of your team is a smaller version of your team than it is today. And you're responsible for everything that you're adding, right? So that isn't to say like, don't add stuff. I think there's always this balance, but there's probably things in everybody's apps that you probably could subtract, but nobody's advocating for it enough.
Yeah, do that extra pass, right? It's so easy to forget, especially for us, because we use the app, but we use the app our way. And like we used to have an onboarding checklist that you went through. And, product thought it was a good idea because we had people coming in. That was back when we had a free plan. So people were coming in and had no idea what they were getting. They had no customer service. They had nothing, right? They were just like thrown into it. So we had a checklist, right? But at some point we decided that we didn't need that onboarding anymore. And it's like, it's fine. It's fine to delete it, right? Don't fool yourself that like, oh, it's in Git, so we'll go back. Like it's not, it is in Git. You can go back and get it, but you won't. Nobody will remember that it's there. But like the front end got rid of it, but I just came across it and it's still in the back end, right? So like we have deleted it, but we didn't delete it all the way because we were doing something else, didn't think about it. It's like, so guess what I'm going to be doing this week? It's getting rid of that.
I know that you stepped into a manager role as the company's evolved. So how did that shift your relationship with the code base?
Oh man, did it shift it? Yeah. Stepping into management is, you got to exercise the pragmatist muscle so much more, right? And it certainly helps obviously coming from development, right? Understanding the drive to see something through all the way to the end, like sanding off every edge case, getting it all down, that kind of thing. So from what I found in the new job is like not just supporting the team, but it's so much of the like, now I'm empowered to say no more, no to things that maybe product wants to do, no to some of the things that developers not want to do, but you see that, you're having your one-on-ones with them and they're talking about like, I'm having a hard time doing this, and being able to say, don't do that, right? Like, it's fine. Me saying it's fine is like, I'd love that, right? Because what I'm doing is I'm giving you permission to not think about that anymore. And that's just so different because I am not that developer. I am the developer who wants to make it work, make it right, make it fast. I don't care so much about the make it fast part, but the making it right thing is always the like, what more refactoring can I do? How much better can I make all of this stuff? It still doesn't read right. What can I do, versus the like, hey, we have a product and we got to get some value in front of customers as soon as we possibly can. So walking that line, it just becomes very clear kind of at the management level where that line is. We have really good relationships with the rest of the company. So I'm the one usually having those kind of conversations. And I'm also empowered to tell the devs to just put that to the side. Let's just ship it, right? Like, it's fine. Are you comfortable with shipping it? Then let's just go. Like, let's just get this out and get this in front of people rather than spending way more time than we need to trying to make sure it's perfect, right?
As your team has gotten smaller, when you think about may or may not be in a hiring phase right now, but how do you think about the level of experience with Ruby on Rails specifically? Do you think is changed? Do you feel like that's something that maybe in our previous conversation you mentioned that maybe like you would hire people at Rainforest and you could teach them Rails to some degree? Is that accurate recollection of what we had discussed there?
Yeah, when we were larger, even just like not when we were like 15, 20, it's the like, hire a great developer and they'll be great at developing. And sure, yes, but also the thing that you need to watch, and we've actually had this happen, where if you've got the time, if you've got that only really works if you've got support for that developer, right? They don't need to be mentored like a junior developer coming in needs to be mentored, but they do need to be shown the ropes when it comes to Rails, right? If you have no Rails or Ruby experience, you're coming from something completely different, they're not going to write stuff idiomatically. And like, all of the linters in the world won't tell you why that's a good idea. I still get stuff from Reek where it's like, I get this thing, I go to the web page to find out like what's wrong with the code. I don't know what it's complaining about, and it just tells me what's wrong with the code. It's like, no, I need, like, how do I improve this? Like, what's the thing to do there? So having that extra help there, I mean, you can do it through PRs, but mentoring through PRs is not good. I've done that. I've gone down that line. So when you're small like us, there is a certain amount of like, I would love to just hire the best developer that I possibly can. But right now, if and when we hire again, I need to hire the best React developer I can, or the best Rails developer that I can, or the best ops developer that I can. We just don't have the ability internally to support them and get them up to speed and get them writing good Rails code, because good Rails code is different and good Ruby code is different than good Rails code, right? All of that kind of stuff. And like, if you've been with Rails long enough, right, you know that there's all of the, not even the edge cases, but the like, yeah, we kind of just don't do that anymore, right? Like, and like, you don't want them, you're setting them up to fail a little bit in that sense, right? And like, there is learning in that, but like, at the size that we're at and the position that the business is in, we need to get stuff out the door. And then the other side too is like, we did have some developers that were really good developers that we hired, came in and absolutely hated Ruby and Rails. So what do you do in that case? right? Like we gave them an app, like we actually do have another like microservice that they worked on. It's like it they did an okay job, but when you're looking at the code, it's only Rails in the sense that like it's using Railsy stuff, but like it's not written in a Ruby way, it's not written in a Rails way. And so now, same thing. It's like, are you going to teach this person a lesson through PRs? No. But so then can you find something else for them to do? Maybe not in our shop, right? Like, so you just got to be mindful of that too. You just don't know.
When an organization is bringing in people that come from other tech stacks and they're maybe not as excited to work with Rails or Ruby and kind of see like, well, it's a job and then, but that often, at least from my sense is that that's when a lot of other tech stacks start popping up in people's platforms when they're like, well, we can try these other things. And I think it's great that you're allowing your team to experiment and play with different technologies. That's an important thing for professional development, but also as you're living with the results of all those decisions of being like, let's be flexible and experiment a lot of things. But we're still at the heart, we're going to be a Ruby on Rails shop. This is the platform we're kind of sticking with. And there's a couple of little outliers here. But if you're someone's listening right now and they're in a growing team and they are a little lax on that right now, maybe they think that's a good thing, would you give them some thoughts on like, hey, maybe don't get, I'm not saying there's a right way to handle that, because I think we've also seen good examples where people have a lot of different tooling in their platform and that works at the scale that they are and they maintain, but not all projects need to do that. And so where's
Yeah.
that balance there?
Yeah, it's interesting because like, yeah, I'm definitely not going to be prescriptive on this call because everybody's going to have their own tolerance for it, right? Like at the very least, you should be thinking really hard about it, especially if you haven't done it before, right? If you're at that first step of like, all right, we've gotten to the point where we can hire a junior developer and train them up. We can hire somebody from outside the like ecosystem that we're working them in or that we're working in and getting them on board. You have to realize that just because they're senior and they can pick up a language like you would not believe, that is not it's not enough to just throw them to the wolves. Like you are still going to have to spend time with them, getting them trained up. And then there is a chance, right? It's a small chance, but I mean, it's not I know it can happen because I've seen it. It's like what happens if they're not super into it, and then what do you do? And maybe your team is growing big enough that like you're not really a Rails shop. You just have this app and you've got all kinds of stuff and you can move them. You've got enough teams so you can kind of move them around to. Maybe they'll love to do front end development. Throw them on that for a while. But yeah, I would be more cautious for those people who are just getting into that. If you've got a big team right now, right? You know what kind of tolerance you kind of have for that. The other side is like check your like internal engineering culture, right? Like how are you hiring for that? Because that's going to, I think, really direct a lot of it too. You should have a sense of before you hire this person, not just their technical chops, but what are they like as a person? And are they going to fit in? And are they going to, maybe come around to Rails after a bit because they gave it a shot? Or are they immediately going to shut down, all efforts kind of thing? And like we've been really good at Rainforest at hiring for culture, which is why I think our team is kind of operating at the level that we're at. But it's hard, right? Doing that kind of thing it's easy to see if somebody can write. Well, should be easy to see if somebody can write some code, but it's very difficult to find out how they are at taking criticism of that code and being open to change and talking to product and all of that kind of thing.
Out of curiosity, kind of circling back to the first question, what keeps you on Rails? How do you, maybe I shouldn't assume this, but do you believe that Ruby on Rails has been part of Rainforest's secret sauce?
Yeah, I think so, right? It's funny because we don't have like the typical everything is in Rails and all that kind of stuff. But even if it's not necessarily the fact that it's Rails itself, but that like uh, I don't even want to bring up the recent controversy with with like was it the bundler and Rails and Ruby and all that kind of thing. But I just read a good article that was talking about the quote unquote good old days, and their good old days was like my good old days of like the Ruby and Rails community and that kind of thing. And there was something about those people, how that started up, that like that is the secret sauce that I feel like we have in Rainforest right now. Now, you could probably take Rails out and put Django in or put some other thing in there, and now we would be okay. But I don't know that you get the same set of people who built Rainforest engineering to where it is now without that base, and then the mix of people that we brought in who just jived with it, right? Like even if they don't get Rails, that kind of thing, they're still just like, yeah, we're all just trying to do the best here, right? And like the big thing for us is like the no bullshit. It's through the company. If we still have values, I'm sure we do, but where they're enshrined, but that has always been the one that has stuck around. And so much of it is just the like, we trust what it is that you're doing, right? And we're not calling you out to call you out, but like if there are hard questions, we expect you to be able to answer them. And we expect you to, if you can't answer them, that's fine, right? We expect you to say that, go off and find the answer and come back. And there's just something about that. That's really the secret sauce of it. It's not so much Rails itself, but it's like that whole community, how that all built up originally, and then how we hired kind of based off of that.
That resonates a lot with me as well. Jay, I'm curious, like what thing that comes bundled in Ruby on Rails is the thing that resonates with you most? Is there one feature in Rails that you just like if you were to tell someone that you got to check out Rails, look at this thing?
I mean, it sounds stupid, but just the fact of like when you hit Rails new, there's a folder structure, and that folder, and like if you know anything about MVC, we can argue about whether it is MVC or whatever, right? But like if you know anything about it, you know where things can go, and like that is it's ridiculous. That plus the fact that like you can spin up the server and it's right there. But like the feature, it's like as much as I hate having to deal with poorly written like active record stuff, like the ORM in Rails is just, it's so good, right? It's so good. You can shoot yourself in the foot with it. You can do what we've done, which is decide that like the way to use active record is to write a giant SQL query that is like just a massive string and then invoke it that way, right? Like, but you can do that, right? If you get down to that level. But especially recently with like the advancements that they've made with the Arrow, I think that's how you pronounce it, and like all the stuff that you can do of like building queries out from there. It's so nice, N+1s aside, but that's the thing. It's like, if you've never used an ORM before, and I mean, back when we started, I certainly hadn't, that's where the magic is. And then kind of taking that step down too of like active model. I really like what's going on there. Being able to serialize things in and out, get the column level, wrapping things, like that's really nice too. I mean, that's really the thing. The ORM is the killer Rails feature for me.
It was the first thing that got me excited about Rails, and 20 something years later, I'm just still like, active record, dreamed that I would have had something like that before in my prior era of software development. All right, Jay, well, a couple of quick last questions for you. We've held you hostage long enough. So is there a technical book that you find yourself recommending to peers?
Yeah, I mean, I'll give you 3.
Great.
2 by Avdi Grimm, who I think is maybe one of the best Ruby educators out there. His Exceptional Ruby and Confident Ruby, both of those books, I think they're available on the Pragmatic Programmers, but like just really changed my brain about how to work with Ruby, especially Confident Ruby.
It's a good book.
Yeah, which is, I mean, you can take the Ruby out of it, right? It's confident whatever language you're using, but just the thinking about structuring methods in that way has made just such a huge difference in my life. And then the third one is Michael Feather's Working Effectively with Legacy Code. That is another one that like I can't remember how long ago that got recommended, but just like
it's a good one.
Blew my mind just simply because of the like 1 or 2, 3 concepts in there. The concept of the seam, the concept of I can't remember when you're trying to like find kind of that like pivot point in the code that like it will let you actually use that seam. And then, but the big thing is like breaking dependencies and all of the different ways that he has of breaking dependencies in the back, right? It's just, yeah, there's a lot that probably most people don't need at the beginning of the book, but that last half of it with breaking dependencies is just, I literally broke it out this week to deal with this payment processing stuff. I'm like, where do I begin?
That's great. I'll definitely include links to all those books in the show notes for everybody as well. And I actually interviewed both of them on Maintainable. So I'll maybe try to include links to those as well, or people can search for that and find those as well. Where can folks follow your work or keep up with what you're building online?
We're trying to resurrect the Rainforest blog. We actually just put a new blog post out for the first time in years. We got a lot of smart developers, right? So we are going to start trying to post more stuff there. And then I'm Jay Tennier on basically every social media thing. I don't really post on X or anything anymore, but Blue Sky, Mastodon, that kind of, not a lot of tech stuff there, but you will get a sense of me personally for sure.
All right. Well, great. The people track you down there, and this episode can be an excuse to write something on that engineering blog.
Yep, absolutely.
Well, with that, Jay, thank you so much for stopping by to talk shop with us today. And yeah, thanks so much for sharing everything with the Ruby on Rails community.
Oh, thanks for having me. Been a pleasure.
That's it for this episode of On Rails. This podcast is produced by the Rails Foundation with support from its core and contributing members. If you enjoyed the ride, leave a quick review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or YouTube. It helps more folks find the show. Again, I'm Robby Russell. Thanks for riding along. See you next time.